Welcome back to Franklin Covey's podcast on Leadership with Scott Miller. I'm your host and interviewer. Almost 7 years this podcast has been shining the Franklin Covey spotlight onto world-renowned thought leaders, creators, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, academics, researchers, scientists, celebrities, movie stars, people that may or may not be a household name, many of which may have experienced, in some cases, unspeakable tragedies or traumas, and summon the courage and the abundance to come on our podcast and share about their growth and their learning to make you a better leader, to make you a more highly effective person, to ignite and unleash the greatness that exists in all of us. I'm honored to be part of the Franklin Covey Company, the world's most trusted leadership firm, and one of my top 3 all-time favorite authors, creators, mentors, coaches, is rejoining us today for his second appearance. If you follow me on social media, you know that one of my top 3 favorite books ever written or consumed by me is the book, The Everyday Hero Manifesto. I love this book for numerous reasons, not just the episodic insight, but the way the author and the creator writes, how he organizes, how his chapters flow together like a card deck. And Robin Sharma is rejoining us today to talk about his newest book, The Wealth Money Can't Buy. Robin Sharma, huge honor. Welcome back to On Leadership.
Scott, such a pleasure, and thank you for being so extraordinarily generous. It really means a lot to me.
Robin, I'm a huge fan, and you deserve it. I think you put in the reps. I think you have a positivity, a realistic positivity, but just an energy infusion that is so needed in an otherwise fairly toxic competitive world. I've read a few books, as you can see from the set. I've authored 9 myself and have released 7 so far. I'm a voracious consumer of your insights. Today, we're going to talk about your newest release that has swept every bestseller list around the world. We could spend 10 minutes talking about every list it's on. We're not going to do that. In a moment, we'll talk about the insights in The Wealth Money Can't Buy. But with your permission, I'm going to rewind a couple of decades because I think your journey is actually very replicable. I think if people could understand some of the insights that you lived by and uncovered, anybody who's launching a product, developing a service, writing a book, creating anything, they can learn from your courage, your humility, your perseverance, and your work ethic. Would you rewind a couple of decades and retell in painful detail the circumstance from the bookstore and the business card?
Sure. Well, I used to be a litigation lawyer. I was a successful litigation lawyer, Scott, but a very empty litigation lawyer. I would say, what's the point of winning in the world but losing yourself in the process? It's fool's gold. And so I decided to pull back from that position and do a lot of inner searching. I tried a lot of different modalities, whether it was meditation, reading books of wisdom, working with healers, finding mentors, experimenting with all sorts of different personal growth techniques. I made a very significant shift in my life, and I decided to write about it. I self-published a book that everyone laughed at the title of, called The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. I self-published it in a 24-hour copy shop. My mother was my first editor. My father, who just turned 87 on Friday, helped me sell it at service clubs. And that book started to sell. One day I was in a bookstore. They had 5 copies on consignment. They wouldn't pay for the books. Consignment, as you know, is you leave the books with the bookstore. If they sell them, they pay you. If they don't, you pick them up. And it was a rainy night. I was there with my son, Colby, who was about 4 years old at the time. I was signing the copies of the book because someone once told me if an author signs the book, the bookstore can't return the books. And a gentleman was watching me sign the books. Long story short, he said, "What a great title, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. Tell me about what you do." I said, "I'm a litigation lawyer, but this is my call." He handed me a business card. He said, it said, Ed Carson, HarperCollins. 2 weeks later, they bought the world rights for the lofty sum of $7,500, and I just kept on writing more books, left the law, and here I am talking to Scott Miller on leadership.
Robin, what's the takeaway that you want every person that has a dream, right? I mean, if you don't believe in yourself, why would anyone else, to quote Mel Robbins? What do you want that takeaway to be for any creator that at the end of this podcast decides they're ready?
A few takeaways. The first would be your instinct is so much more powerful than your intellect. Your instinct is your voice of wisdom. Your intellect is basically the sum total of the knowledge the world has sold you. So trust your instinct, whether it's to start the app, run the marathon, find true love, launch a spiritual enterprise, grow a team, trust your instinct. Second thing I would say is use every opportunity to iterate your craft. I call this a GCA, a gargantuan competitive advantage. Too many good souls are card-carrying members of the cult of mediocrity. Use every day at work to get better at your craft. My first cover was a mess, but I made the cover better. The first book was, it was my first book, but I studied the masters. I read about writing. I polished my craft. I put in the sweat equity until I got better and better. I believe the marketplace rewards magic rendered, and it's a great opportunity. Third thing I would say, it's unbelievable how far you can get if you simply stay monomaniacally focused on your mighty mission longer than the world thinks you should. This is year number 31. I've been a leadership mentor and speaker and writing these books on personal development and leadership. And I've just stayed true to the vision I originally had. I'm no one special. I grew up in a little town. I didn't have a silver spoon in my mouth, but I really love what I do. And so I just have stayed in the game for a long time and I haven't been distracted by shiny toys. And it's just amazing how far you can get if you stay focused on that personal Mount Everest.
Robin, I am frequently asked weekly by people I don't know and do know on 7 social media platforms and multiple emails, hey, Scott, you know a lot of people. What books should I read? I'm struggling with this or that or the other. And inevitably, it's one of 2 books. I say, well, Liz Wiseman's book, Multipliers, I think is one of the best leadership books ever authored. And I say, well, then you absolutely must complement that with Robin Sharma's book, The Everyday Hero Manifesto. I have had multiple dinner parties at my home with the book is on everybody's plate as a gift because I think this book is so phenomenal. I have texted you photos of this as well. There's one chapter in this book, The Everyday Hero Manifesto, that I want you to retell the story on because I told you off air, even more than 30 years of my time having spent with Dr. Covey here in the organization and with the firm, this chapter has had a larger impact on my life than perhaps anything else. It's chapter 7, and you call it, that time, my private journals were taken. And in the chapter, you're fairly ambiguous. You don't really share whether you knew the person. You don't share whether they were caught or you got them back. You're a quite deliberate writer. You share exactly what you want your reader to know to teach the lesson you think they should learn. And so I would like it if you would take a few moments and share this story and remind all of us what the lesson learned is, and then we'll pivot over to the newest book, The Wealth Money Can't Buy.
Sure. And if I may, Scott, before I answer the question, I shared a platform with Dr. Covey, and it's now about 30 years ago. And as I said when we were off air, he was a true master, and he was one of those people, and I haven't seen many of them, but when Dr. Covey spoke, the strength of his character owned the room, or his character, his integrity was just so strong. He didn't have to be flashy, didn't have to be moving all over. He stood there in a beautiful suit and he just spoke so incredibly wisely and profoundly. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. So yes, that chapter of the Everyday Hero Manifesto, that time my personal journals were taken. Well, what can I say? There was a time in my life where 10 years of my journals, let's just say, vanished. These journals, I journal every morning. I've got my journal right here for this season of my life. In my journals, I write about my hopes. I write about my fears. I write about what I'm learning. I write about where I'm visiting. I have a new tool I've been teaching called the 5-question morning maximizer, where every morning I ask myself 5 questions and I answer in about a paragraph. Very powerful tool. First question is, what am I grateful for? Because gratitude is the antidote to fear. Second question is, where am I winning? Because the human brain has a feature called the negativity bias that you know very well about, that causes us to look for threats versus where we're winning. So this protects our hope and gives us energy. Third question I ask myself every morning these days is, what must I let go of? Because we don't want to carry people we haven't forgiven on our back through our days. Fourth question, what does my ideal day look like? Clarity precedes mastery. Fifth question is, what must be said at the end? So we connect with how we will have wished we will have lived at the end today, and that way we're more strategic versus reactive. So these journals, 10 years of them, had my most profound experiences. It had things I was learning. It had so much that was only for me, and they vanished. So what would I say the lesson might be for all of your many viewers and readers from around the world? It would be that experience taught me to let go. I talk a lot about the power of journaling for leadership and elite performance and high creativity. And a lot of people say, I would love to keep a journal, but what if someone sees it? And I got to a place through my inner work because of this experience, Scott, where it's okay. If anyone sees it, they'll see a human being who is doing the work, trying to figure it out, trying to become stronger and wiser and better and less insecure and more brave and more decent and more loving. And so often life will send us things. I believe life comes not to teach us failure, but ultimately for our fortune. And that experience taught me to let go and just acceptance, which is, I think, a very profound human lesson.
I have reread this chapter multiple times because I remind myself literally weekly, Robin, if a person with the public profile and influence like Robin Sharma can have his innermost thoughts and secrets and fears and tragedies and all of that. You use that word tragedy with some frequency in your books, by the way. If you can move past the fact that your journals were taken and the reality that they could be published, they could be blackmailed. I mean, you share the story with not a lot of detail, quite intentionally. You don't say they were stolen. You actually say they were taken. And so you're very intentional with how you write this chapter, and has really, for me, provided some liberation on what I hold on to, how tight I hold on to certain things, and being a little more willing to let go. I'm wound pretty tight, as you can tell. It was an absolute gift to me, as is much of what you write.
If I could just speak to that, Scott, ultimately, life is a very short ride. And I think talking about death is not negative. I think it's actually inspirational, because when you connect with the shortness of life, you live to the point and you show real leadership, and you don't hold back on realizing your ethical ambitions and being the human being you want to be. And so when we ultimately we're all going to end up as dust in a urn on a mantle over a fireplace next to Little League trophies. And when you start thinking like that, and that's the power of that fifth question I talked about, it reminds you of that Stoic and Latin term, memento mori, remember you'll die. And if you remember you'll die, and if you remember that the great kings and queens who felt they were so important are not really spoken about, then I think it gives you a key word, which is important for leadership in life, which is perspective. And so what? Someone takes my journals. or they see what I went through, my struggles and my victories, my losses and my triumphs. We're all human beings. We're all human beings. We're all doing our best. It's not such a big thing.
Robin, your newest release, The Wealth Money Can't Buy, which has, like I said before, swept every possible list around the world. I follow you on social media, so I know where you're jet setting. I know when you were in Dubai. I know when it was wheels up from Dubai, because I actually like following your social. You write these books in a similar format. You write very episodically, small chapters. Sometimes these chapters are 300 words, sometimes they're 1,000 words, but you write in a fairly swift pace. You organize them with some themes. Talk about your writing style. Why do you write the way you do? And then we'll get into some of my favorite concepts in this new book, The Wealth Money Can't Buy.
Absolutely. Well, I write the Everyday Hero Manifesto in the new book. Yes, it's small chapters to move quickly, but the 5 a.m. Club was, as you know, in a story format. The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari was a story. And what I like to do is I like to do both. I think stories are powerful because human beings, ever since we lived in caves, we would pass along wisdom through stories. Everyone loves a good film. Everyone loves a good story. Why am I writing the last 2 books in this, to use your word, episodic way, short chapters? I think this world, so many of us are suffering from broken focus syndrome. Yeah. So many of us have lost the ability to focus on maybe even reading a book for 2 hours in a sitting or 3 hours. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to offer heavyweight insight and wisdom, but in a way that gave people the feeling that there was a lot of momentum and energy in the book. Ultimately, you as an author, I believe, or I'm sure, I as an author, I want to have an impact. I want the book to really shape people and move people and cause them to change the way they're living, leading, and behaving. And I thought doing it in short chapters would be a great way to do it. And also I'm finding I just like writing in these short chapters. I write the first draft on my iPhone, so I can write, a 2-page chapter on my iPhone. And then what I do is I print out the manuscript, and then I rewrite the manuscript over and over and over. On this new book, I rewrote the manuscript last year about 20 times, 10,000 or so changes per manuscript. So this new book was really, I call it a beautiful suffering. I suffered to make it the best work I could possibly do, but it's beautiful because even if no one read it, Scott, who you become when you go to the jagged edges of your personal talent is worth more than all the money in the world.
Robin, 175 very short chapters in this new book. The one that spoke to me the most is chapter 141. You titled it, Slow Everything Down. And I'm going to ask our listeners and viewers to suffer with me. It's a very short chapter, perhaps even the shortest in the book. I'm going to read it, and I'm going to ask you to riff on it, because it spoke to me, and I'm going to bet it's going to speak to millions that are watching and listening. The chapter is 141, Slow Everything Down. Join the slow movement. Many people are into slow cooking, slow eating, and slow working, being far more patient, thoughtful, and careful as they perform their craft. I recommend that you practice slow living. Accept fewer requests to do things you really don't want to do. Buy less stuff. Enjoy your days with fewer to-dos to make more time for interesting conversations, and pause to savor the obvious gifts of life. Most of us are so busy being busy that we miss. Busier is mostly never better. Breathe more slowly, chew more slowly, walk more slowly, think, talk more slowly, and feel more profoundly. Slow everything down versus speeding everything up. And living like your pants are on fire doesn't mean you're lazy. it only means you're wise?
Well, what I'm suggesting, or you want me to riff on it, I would say the most effective, masterful artists, business titans, athletes, and in many ways human beings are minimalists versus maximalists. We live in a culture right now, I believe, that encourages us to create 1,000 mediocrities versus one Taj Mahal, one masterwork, one Sistine Chapel ceiling, one Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And so that chapter of The Wealth Money Can't Buy is about going deep versus wide. There's another story in the book that might speak to your audience, and it's called Be a Perfect Moment Creator. It's a true story about a gentleman, and I emphasize the word gentleman, whose name was Eugene O'Kelly. Eugene O'Kelly was the global CEO of KPMG.
He wrote
Eugene
the book
O'Kelly,
Chasing Daylight. This book is a profound book for anyone entering the end of life. Sorry for interrupting you. I love this book.
No, I appreciate you saying that. And Eugene O'Kelly went into his doctor's office to receive the results of a routine medical, and his doctor came out with an expression you never want to see on your doctor's face when you're getting your medical results. Long story short, he was given 90 days left to live. He was told he had inoperable brain cancer, and he was told to go home and get his affairs in order. Confronted with his mortality, Eugene O'Kelly did something very wise and deeply inspiring to both of us. And he said, you know what? I'm going to use the business skills that helped me so well as a corporate titan and reverse engineer the last 90 days of my life. Because confronted with his imminent death, he realized that in all his years in business, he had never taken his wife to lunch. He had missed so many of his daughter's Christmas concerts. He had not taken long walks with his great friends in Central Park. And so he made a commitment to become a perfect moment creator and slow it all down and focus on what's most important. And that idea transformed in many ways my family life. With my kids, for example, it was creating perfect moments. And I think that speaks to the chapter you spoke of, because at work, we're often busy being busy, but there's no point of being busy around the wrong things. And in the book, I talk about your Project X, like slow it down. And rather than chasing 1,000 mediocre projects, do one Project X, one monumental work that stands the test of time, even if it takes 20 years to do it. And in our personal life, it's better to have 5 great friends than 5,000 digital friends. It's better to master 3 books this year than skim 100 books. It's better to be good being alone and enjoying the practice of solitude than being in the world so much. You hear so much noise, you miss out on the signal.
Robin, thank you for forgiving me for the interruption. Eugene O'Kelly was a Franklin Covey client of ours. He, I believe, owned a travel services company that invested heavily in Franklin Covey's leadership solutions for his company. That book had a profound impact on many of our leadership associates here, and the book is Chasing Daylight. It is a must-read for anybody who has the gift of knowing your life is ending and you have a chance to tie it together. Your current book is formed into 8 habits. You organize all of these 75 chapters in 8 sections: growth, wellness, family, craft, money, community, adventure, and service. One of my other favorite chapters in this book is 46. You call it Don't Carry Grudges. It's a very short chapter.
Yeah.
It's obvious, it's self-evident, something that I think we all struggle with. I'm going to use the same phrase, riff on that. In the hopes, maybe tell the story in the book. It's a beautiful story, I think, about a brother and his brother in the hotel or in a hospital. But it's something everybody could leave today with a profound gift in their own life.
Well, there were these 2 brothers, and They had a little fight, and as a result of that, for many, many, many decades, they did not talk. Just a little fight, little misunderstanding, but they didn't work through it. They didn't communicate through it. They didn't find peace. They set up walls versus building, I don't want to say bridges, it's a cliche, but rather than figuring it out. And then one of the brothers ended up very sick, and he was on his deathbed, and the other brother showed up from out of nowhere with a gift and basically said, "I'm sorry." They found forgiveness. The brother who was ill said, "I'm so angry at you," because they didn't make amends. And shortly after that, they finally found solutions. They made peace with each other. They shared those final moments, and I believe it was the next day, the ill brother passed away. The idea behind that chapter, it's a simple chapter, but I think the ideas in there could be very helpful to a lot of people. The idea really is, do not be a resentment collector. A lot of us, we all get hurt. We all get betrayed in business, in life. We all get disappointed. It's the human journey. I think the key is to remember that I've yet to meet the perfect person. And the key is to remember we do the best we can do based on the level of consciousness, wisdom, and understanding that we're at. And Maya Angelou said it well. If we could do better, we could have done better, we would have done better. Or if we knew better, we could do better. And so forgiving someone is not condoning their behavior. Forgiving someone is a gift you give to them, and you say, "I understood, you did your best." And forgiving someone is a gift you give yourself. Because if you haven't forgiven someone, it is metaphorically as if you are carrying them with you through work, through life, on your back. Imagine the creative cost, the energetic cost, the optimism cost, the performance cost, the peacefulness cost of not forgiving the people who have hurt you. So that chapter is really about letting go. The past is not a prison to be stuck in. The past is a school to be learned from. Personally, I've learned the most from my most difficult experiences. Those situations, even the journal incident you mentioned, Scott, those are the very difficult times that taught me whatever wisdom I have, whatever strength I carry, and whatever wisdom I currently have.
Robin, I'm mindful of our time. There are about 3 more concepts from the book I do want to ask you about. Before that, as I was preparing for our conversation today, mainly because I was excited. As I mentioned, I have had such great benefit in my life from your books, as a father, as a spouse, as an entrepreneur, as an author, as a creator, as a friend, as a son, as a brother, lots of roles. I thought, what question do I want to ask Robin? And here it comes. I want you to opine on the concept of work-life balance, recognizing that a large portion of our audience are Americans, which will have a different, view of that than you might say Western Europeans or Asians or South Americans, you name it. It's a conundrum. You hear some people saying, well, there's no such thing because you have one life and now they're integrated, so find balance where you can. Others will say your life is in seasons. Sometimes it's in balance, sometimes it's out of balance. Others will say, no. You separate with clear delineation what is your professional life and your personal life, because now in a new hybrid world, you could work 24 hours a day because of technology. I'd love to have you just weigh in on, if someone is listening, okay, millions are struggling with this concept of work-life balance. To quote Oprah, caller, you say what?
Well, first of all, I have to just genuinely thank you for being so gracious to me about your words. That's my fuel. To know I've been of service to you and helpful. This is why I keep going 31 years into the game. This work is my oxygen. And to know I've been helpful to you, it really means a lot. And I want to thank you for just going to such an effort to be so kind and generous. So how I would how the caller would answer is this. I think all ambition has become a dirty word in our society. I think hard work is becoming, a negative thing for a lot of people. And all I know, with a lot of years under my belt at this stage, is I come alive doing difficult things. I come alive knowing I'm being helpful to people. I come alive traveling and having interesting conversations and pursuing projects that bring me to the jagged edges of my human potential. What I'm trying to say is work has dignity. Whether you are a grave digger or an astronaut, a teacher or a HR leader, a CEO or a barista, there is great nobility in doing your work like it's the most important work in the world. It allows you to serve. It allows you to build intimacy with your gifts and your talents. It keeps you young. It allows you to express your creativity. It allows you to do good things for good people. So that's the first thing I would say. Ambition and doing difficult, monumental projects is a beautiful thing. So then where does balance fit in? Well, that's really the 8 forms of wealth that the Wealth Money Can't Buy is based around. Society, macro level, society says you are rich if you have a lot of money. You are wealthy if you have a big stock portfolio. What I've tried to do in this book is share 8 forms of wealth, 8 forms of winning, 8 forms of success. Of course, money is one of them. There's nothing wrong with making money. It puts food on the family table, allows us to do great things for the people that we love. It allows us to more freedom, et cetera, et cetera. But there are 7 other forms of wealth that once you know them and live them, you live a balanced life, you live a rich life, you live a truly successful life. So, yeah, that's how I would answer it. Balance is absolutely possible. It comes down to your daily rituals because your days are your life in miniature. And you get good habits, you can have some great balance.
Robin, chapter 6 in The Wealth Money Can't Buy is titled, "The Best Way to Start is to Start." And you had a great line in this that I underlined. You wrote, "The way you start is to start." Often overthinking and hyper-complicating how to get going is a sabotaging symptom of fear. I loved that phrase, overthinking and hyper-complicating. When you coach and mentor people, whether they are, creating an Etsy store that sells their sweaters, or it's major global CEOs, because you do lots of work philanthropically, you're a humanitarian, lots of roles. Encapsulate this chapter, the best way to start is to start, so that when people finish listening to this podcast in 6 minutes, they start.
Leadership is about getting the job done. Leadership, quite simply, in my methodology, is the opposite of victimhood. Victims are all about CBE, complaint, blame, and excuse. Leaders are all about APR, absolute personal responsibility. So the chapter you're speaking of came from, I hear this a lot, like, where do we start? But the chapter you're speaking of came from an interview. I was in Dubai, and the broadcaster said, "This is all great. Where do we start?" And I replied, the best place to start is to start. Often we do overcomplicate it. Where do I start the new project? Where do I start the book? Where do I start the transformational change initiative at work? Where do I start? Well, often that is a reflection of fear. We complicate it, and we're scared of failing, we're scared of being laughed at, we're scared of stumbling, so we overcomplicate it. If you want to write a book, write the first paragraph today. If you want to run a marathon, get off the sofa, walk around the block. You want to find true love, go to the grocery store, you see someone attractive in the avocado section, walk over and have a conversation about avocados. It's not that hard. Lao Tzu said, the 1,000-mile journey begins with a single step. Just start. And I believe that when you start something with focus, passion, sincerity, a willingness to produce magic and push it into the marketplace, the world, and I know this sounds a little philosophical, but I believe the world sends you all sorts of opportunity, all sorts of unexpected energy, and all sorts of coincidences that show up to celebrate you getting off that sofa and getting the job done.
Let's end with the insights from chapter 98. You title it, Remember the Habits Beat IQ slogan. I'm going to read 2 paragraphs, then have you finish us off. Top habits are more valuable to financial riches than off-the-chart intelligence every day of the week. Memorize that brain tattoo. Sing it in the streets and then shout that slogan from the rooftops because it's incredibly important. Top habits are more valuable to financial riches than off-the-chart intelligence every day of the week. You then write, actually, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Many of the multi-billionaires I've mentored are not the smartest people on the planet. They're bright for sure, but not more than the average person. In my experience, being too smart and too academic and too well-educated causes one to overthink things and to accept only what the status quo says is reasonable. Yet all inventions, innovations, and advancements came from a creator who thought and then did the impossible.
Okay, so I would say a few things. First of all, every one of your listeners has a gift. Often we pedestal the athlete, we pedestal the billionaire, we pedestal the Beethoven. These were ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things. We could deconstruct it because, number one, they were particularly focused. They didn't dilute their talents. Number two, they put in the practice time, which we know. Number three, they had incredible resilience. So they took the stones that the trolls and haters threw at them and built them into monuments of mastery that stood the test of time. So we all have a gift. Like, we put these geniuses up on a pedestal, but genius is less about genetics and more about your daily habits. Maybe I should say that again because I think it's valuable to all your followers. Genius is less about genetics and it's more about your habits. Now, people often say, well, I can't do those things. I can't join the 5 a.m. club. I can't get up early. I can't produce masterwork in the marketplace. I can't handcraft a beautiful life I'll adore at the end. But we do have a gift, every one of us, and it's the gift of neuroplasticity, which is another feature of the human brain that causes the brain to adapt and grow according to practice and new conditions. And so all too often what we do is we start an initiative. Maybe it's getting up early, maybe it's being a better listener, a better leader, more productive, less social media time, but we give up too early. And so we need to stay with the new skill long enough for neuroplasticity to take effect. So we build a new neural architecture until the habit becomes automatic. According to University College London, it takes 66 days of practicing a new skill until it reaches a point called automaticity, where the new habit becomes easier to do than the old habit. Secondly, I would say, the billionaires, they just exercise self-discipline. They understand that willpower is like a muscle. The more you flex it, the stronger it will grow. It is stunning how powerful a human being can become when each day you practice and you do difficult things. Bonus point, leadership is about the consistent doing of difficult things. Our culture says live an easy life. What I'm suggesting is hard is easy, because you do hard things, you'll live an easy life because of all the rewards. And the last thing, to bring value to all your followers, I would suggest 4 habits that will be completely revolutionary for any leader, any human being. Number one, get up early, join the 5 a.m. club, give yourself a victory hour for 1 hour at the front end of your day to build yourself stronger. As the Spartan warriors say, sweat more in training, you'll bleed less in war. Secondly, remember the 5 great hour rule. All you need to do, fine, you're at work 8 hours or 10 hours, 5 great hours is all you need. Third thing, have a family meal. We take the people we love for granted until we lose them. And the last thing I would say is each day practice what I call the 60-minute student philosophy, 1 hour of learning, because education is inoculation against disruption, and the leader who learns the most wins.
Robin Sharma, you were gracious enough to join us 2 years ago to talk about your book, The Everyday Hero Manifesto. Today, our focus has been on your current best-selling release, The Wealth Money Can't Buy. When you accept my invitation 2 years from now to return for your third appearance, you'll be talking about what book?
Wow. You know, I don't, my creative well is a little empty right now. I have a summer of refueling ahead in South Africa in a little cottage on a vineyard. And I have a sense that as I take long walks and reread a lot of the classics that I'm bringing to the cottage with me, the ideals will start germinating again for the next book. But one thing I can definitely share with you, Scott, is if you give me the invitation to come back in 2 years, it would be an absolute pleasure to be back on your show. And I just want to acknowledge you for all the lives and leaders that you touch, and your sincerity and the quality of your content and the good work you do in the world.
Robin Sharma, thank you for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks a lot, Scott.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.